participants who have not yet joined, may you hasten their steps so that they can join and we be in the same company. Thank you because of the organizers, be with them and the presenters as they do the presentation and as we engage. We are praying for your inspiration. In the name of Jesus, we pray and give thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goba. And again, I want to welcome all of us for this webinar stroke seminar. And it's all about climate smart landscapes. And that's the title, looking at the evidence, what are the gaps, opportunities, and opportunities for research. And for sure, I think maybe most of you maybe got the poster already. And it has some information, because when you talk about climate change and how it affects our lives, it affects our lives in all the spheres of our lives, be it how we produce food, our health, our water resources. And the question is, and why we are having this seminar, is to find out how first of all, we get to know how it affects the various aspects of our lives. And then from that, we also want to know what are the opportunities, what are the evidence, what are the gaps, and what are the opportunities for research, and maybe other ways, because we need to adapt to climate change. And therefore, one of the ways that we believe is one of the ways that we can be able to manage the issue of climate change is use of climate smart landscapes. Here we are talking about practices, on the land. We're talking about diversity, diversity in many ways, and you're also talking about how how can we be able to manage land in different ways. We are going to hear that in details. We have some experts here. We'll have three presentations. We have the three presenters, and I believe we have all of them around, and they are going to be speaking on different themes. We are talking about climate smart agriculture. We talk about climate smart land management. We'll also talk about how climate change affects health, and we'll also be talking about the climate and also climate information systems, because when you talk about information, it's very important and it cuts across all the three thematic areas. So we have three presenters around. The first one, we have Professor John Gathenya, who is around. Professor Gathenya is a professor in Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in the Department of Soil, Water, and Environmental Engineering. He's an expert in water resources, and he has done a lot of research, particularly in the issue of climate and how it affects land and land management, and also in the water resources. He'll be one of the presenters, and I think he'll be the first one. He'll be talking about the climate smart land management. Then we also have the second presenter, who is Professor John Wesonga, also a professor here at the university, Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. I think he'll be joining us also online. And he's a professor there in the Department of Horticulture. Professor Wesonga has done a lot of research, particularly in how climate change affects food productivity, agriculture in many areas. We'll hear more from him. He'll be talking about climate smart agriculture, because when we talk about agriculture, we also need to do practices that are also climate smart, so that even the farmers can be able to adapt to the changing climate. The other presenter we have is Dr. Amos Bogwa, and he's around here. He comes from the health background, and I think that is something that maybe not many of us think about climate change and how it affects the health. Dr. Amos Bogwa is a senior lecturer in the Department of Medical Laboratory Sciences, MLS, in the College of Health Sciences. And he's also the chairman of the department currently. And he's an expert in molecular parasitology. And currently, he's also the chair of the JKUAT Scientific and Ethics Review Committee. So he'll be talking about climate change and health. And I think we'll be interested from us who come from other backgrounds to hear him. So those are the three presenters. We are going to hear them later on, but for now, I would want to take this opportunity to welcome the Director of Research at JKUAT, Dr. Shem Kuya, who is here with us. He's going to make his few remarks and also introduce the principal corpus. Welcome, Dr. Shem.
Thank you so much. This is a warm welcome to all of us who are here and also to those who are participating online. Welcome to this event. I'd like to say that the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Production and Extension has blessed us to have this event, and we'll be keen to know the outcome of this activity. So we really appreciate that you'll come and share your thoughts and also listen to our experts. Sorry, I was muted. This is one of the series of seminars that we're looking forward to roll out in the coming periods. For us to be able to discuss the science and the practice of some of the topics that have global relevance, but also that are also locally important for us here. One of that topic is climate change. It's really a topic of global interest, but also it's very locally appropriate, relevant to us. Climate change, as we've heard, affects all areas of our lives, but also through those areas of our life, we affect climate change. That means that tackling climate change requires multidisciplinary approaches. It means that we have to be able to come out and rise above our traditional boundaries of social, health, and natural sciences, and be able to tackle this thing in a way that we are able to pick from each discipline, transcend those disciplines, and synthesize. Later on, we'll be focusing on other aspects of climate change, including energy, but for today, we're dealing with the climate smart landscapes. And so we're hoping that you'll find a place of research within JKUAT, and also even in partnership with other institutions, premier institutions that are working on climate change. I would like to mention that we have a place for each one for research in JKUAT. And so visit us at RPE to be able to know where and how you can participate in research. But at this moment, I would like to welcome the principal, Corpus, Professor Thiongo, to speak to us. Professor Thiongo, welcome.
Thank you, the organizer, Dr. Kuya, our presenters, and the audience. I'm here as one of the people who proposed that we could have this seminar, and as the director research in RPE has pointed out, this is one of the many that are perhaps on the pipeline that will come and address this issue. And see the way forward. One of the interesting things about JKUAT is that we are here, but we don't know sometimes what others are doing. As I listened to Dr. Mwangi reading the profile of Professor Gathenya, Professor Songa, and Dr. Bogwa, I don't know how many there are dealing with climate change. And it's good that we come forward and perhaps combine efforts and see whether we could make a difference, not only in this country, but in the world. I come from the background of chemistry, and the chemistry is also there in issues of climate change. We are the ones who tell you how much carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, carbon, and how much NOx, is around, how much methane, and so on. But climate change is not just the gases. There are many issues. There is even social issues, just as there is health issues. This takes me back in 2008. One time, I was reading a newspaper, and there seemed to be no agreement between the East, what we call the East in the world, and the West in relation to climate change. But I think today we seem to understand, because climate change is real. It's not a story. It's not just data in a publication. We can see all what the impacts are on the climate change. It has informed us. Even of late, I've seen designing of houses, that we design houses that we don't have to use much electrical, right, for lighting, electricity for lighting. I've seen it. It has challenged us. Previously, maybe we would assume we have electricity and so on. But the whole thing about this seminar and others that are to come is, can we form teams, work together? Can we discuss this animal? It's an animal that we may perhaps need to slaughter and see what is inside, see whether there are edibles in it, and whether there are some things that are not edible. And what do we do with what are those that are not edible and those that are edible? The other thing I've also seen is the demand, even in policies. Government policies now, when you start an industry, we need to know, how are you going to handle the risk? Therefore, the issue of climate change is wide. What is also I found interesting is when they talked about cows, and the cows being pollutants. Yet we need the cows for milk. And that is Professor Esonga. And the much methane produced in the farm. We cannot sit and wait to see what would happen. We have to be participants and let's make a change.
Recording in progress.
So, members,
Prof, you're muted. We can't hear you.
From JKUAT will come debate and perhaps come with the teams addressing issues of health, designing of houses, managing waste, managing issues in agriculture. And later on, we will deal with issues of energy and other areas that relate to this. With those few remarks, allow me to declare the webinar open. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Principal.
we really appreciate those excellent remarks into debate and discussion. So we call upon our first presenter, Professor Gabenya.
Just give us a few minutes. Professor Gadenya will be our first presenter. He will be presenting on climate smart land management. Yeah, just a few minutes and. Can you present from where? So okay. Welcome, Professor Gadenya.
So, good morning. My name is John Gadenya, as it has been said. My topic today is on climate management steps. The specific topic is of climate smart land management. It might overlap with some of the things Professor Songa is going to talk about. But I'm basing my presentation on Narok County, where we've been working, but of course it can be generalized to other areas. And I appreciate all of you who are attending, both physically and online. Thank you. The aim of this series of seminars is to discuss the science and practice of climate smart agriculture, climate smart land management, climate change and health, and climate information services, with the aim of exploring the gaps and opportunities for future research and highlighting the opportunities for action, including open collaborations for development funding opportunities. I base my presentation on the topic of flash floods and erosion management in Narok Basin. This is a project that has been funded by National Research Fund. It's a multidisciplinary project with objectives that include characterization of Narok Basin in terms of land cover, soils, slopes, and so on. These are factors that influence floods and soil erosion, simulating runoff, soil erosion, and sedimentation, and evaluating the impacts of soil conservation measures and other ways of managing stormwater in Narok, and recommending measures to mitigate the flood and erosion risk. So our area of study is the basin of Narok. This is a basin that is 8,400 square kilometers, starting from Mau Narok Forest Complex, and running down towards Tanzania, heading in Lake Natra. The specific catchment we have been focusing on is the small catchment upstream of Narok town, which measures 870 square kilometers. And this is the one shown on the left in this map. And some of the students who have been working here are focusing on two small catchments, which are in total 46 square kilometers. These are the two on the right side. And these two small catchments, small as they are the ones that have been responsible for flooding in Narok town. They are actually not permanent rivers, they are seasonal streams that flow only during the rainy season. So one of them is called Esamburgo on the left side, and on the right side, this one is called Kakia. Both of them join in Narok town and are responsible for some of the flood catastrophes that we've seen in the news over the years. A brief overview of Narok County has a population of 1.7 million. As per 2023 statistics, and is home to the famous Masai Mara Game Reserve, the Mau Forest Complex, part of it. Interestingly, it has 1.5 million That means there is like 1 cow for every person living in Narok, and about 2.6 million sheep and 1 million goats. Other livestock species. They grow a lot of wheat in the valley, amongst other crops. Quite a bit of horticulture happening in the river valleys. So a little definition about climate smart agriculture. It is an integrated approach that aims to manage landscapes with the 3 goals or to achieve 3 outcomes. One of them is increased productivity, which should happen in under climate change. The other one is enhanced resilience to climate change. And the other one is reduced greenhouse gas emissions, which is an emission goal. So climate smart agriculture is an approach that involves those elements that I've mentioned, but it is also embedded on the farm and beyond the farm and incorporates technologies, policies, institutions, and investments aimed at achieving the 3 goals that I've mentioned. And this will include strengthening national and local institutions, enhancing financing options, and supporting policy frameworks so that CFA can be achieved. Very quickly, some of the techniques that could contribute towards climate smart agriculture include crop management, including rotations, intercropping, and so on. Livestock management, soil and water management, agroforestry, energy management, climate services, which means providing locally relevant and actionable weather and climate information to inform decisions in crop and livestock management, policies and legislation, financing, and extension services. These are some of the ways that we can intervene to achieve the goals of climate smart agriculture. I don't have to mention this, but we all know that climate change is affecting agriculture and livestock in many ways, especially these increases in temperature cause heat stress that affects crops and livestock. Extreme events like floods and heat waves also affect crop and animal production, as well as infrastructure that is involved in, let's say, transportation of crops and livestock. How is Kenya tackling this? One of the key documents that is informing climate smart agriculture is the Climate Smart Agriculture Strategy 2017-2026, which should be looked at alongside other documents that fall in the domain of agriculture, climate, land and water, environment and forestry, which we know about. Now, a little bit into the details. This is Narok County. This on the left side is a map of soils that are found in the county. Our catchment, our study area falls in the northern part of Narok Basin. And there we have some soils that are called molic andosores. For the soil scientists, I think they will appreciate the properties of these soils. They have very low batch density. In fact, they are known for that. High organic matter content that means it plays an important role in the global carbon cycle. They also have high water holding capacity and excellent drainage and high phosphate retention. They are very high potential for agricultural production as long as they are well conserved. However, they are also very sensitive. And once they are disturbed, they are highly erodible. And that is one of the problems that is affecting our catchment. You can see on the right side, our Narok catchment is basically under these soils called andosores. And therefore, and of course, the slopes are in some areas very steep. And therefore, once they are disturbed, they suffer from erosion, severe erosion. Yeah. The other thing is, just as I said, the andosores have high water holding capacity. You can see on this map of Narok, The soils that have the highest water holding capacities are the ones that are in the northern part of the county. And that's where our study area is. This is where in Narok basin lies. And also very high organic carbon. That's the map on the right. That is the distribution of organic carbon contents in the county. Again, you notice that the soils in our catchment have the highest organic carbon content in the basin. What that means is that if there are any soil erosion happening, then we are actually taking away our best soils in the basin. If you look at the rainfall, which is one of the positive agents for soil erosion, you realize that the rainfall increases from the east going towards the west and also towards the north. So the area in Mount Narok is having the highest rainfall in the county. And that means also we have high expectations of soil erosion happening. So this is a map of the agroclimatic zones. You see the humid areas at the northern side of the county. And in the southern side, we have semi-arid and semi-humid to semi-arid, what we call zone 4 and 5 in our country. And this is the rainfall distribution. Most of the rains happen in March, April, and May, but also the October, November, December rains go on toward January and February. So about climate variability, these two graphs highlight climate variability in the different months. This is an analysis of data from 2019, 2021, 2020. And what you see is that, for example, in some months of, let's say, April and May, you see a little bit of variability, high temperatures happening or being experienced, especially in the later years. The darker you have here in the key, the later the years are. So you notice that in the most recent decade, of 2001 to 2010, you have more and more water events taking place in the county. Same thing with precipitation. If you notice that the variability in the month of April and May, and also in the month of November, especially, and December. Look at December, for example, you have quite some outliers happening that have not been in the past. This is also a graph that is also illustrating the climate variability and trends in the county in terms of standard deviations. So the bigger the circles, the higher the standard deviation. And you see on the y-axis, the years 1950 to 2020. On the left side is temperature. And you realize that in the recent 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, we have climatic temperature events, the maximum temperatures, daily maximum temperatures that are way out of the standard, more than 2.5 standard deviations from the normal. So you realize that these big circles happening between 2010 and 2020, and especially toward 2020, they mean a warming up of the environment, especially in the months of March, April, May, and June. Cold June is a cool month, but what we're talking about here is the deviations from the normal temperature that we know in June. So we have the cooler months are also warming up as we look into the future. So as far as rainfall is concerned, not much has been happening in terms of deviation from the normal in the recent years, except you see in the month of October in 2020, I think 2019, 2020, you see some events that happened within that time, and you'll be looking at those events, especially, and the havoc they caused in the county. But you also notice that in the early 60s, 1960s, 61, 62, 63, 64, we have interesting events that happened that caused, that were very dramatic and caused a lot of flooding, which could be repeated in the future. But let's see what is happening. So here is a graph of temperature. It is obvious that from 1950 to 2020, the temperatures in Narok have been increasing. In fact, it's about 2 degrees warmer. It's a very systematic upward trend that we expect to be to continue into the future. Of course, this is just the mean temperatures. These are surface air temperatures and average mean temperatures, but associated with this are also extreme events that have not been captured in this graph. On the right side is precipitation trends. Between 1950 and 2000, you see somehow up to 2010, a downward trend in the rainfall. But from 2010, you see that there is a change in the way the rainfall is coming, with a pointer towards increased rainfall as we move into the future. And this is consistent with what IPCC reports are saying, that in the future we expect a wetter environment than we have at the moment. So first it was gradual decrease, then after 2010 you see a distinct break, and then an upward trend. So we are looking into the future to see what's happening. And this is IPCC also reports results for Narok Town, looking into the future for various climate carbon concentration pathways. What you see is that we expect, of course, higher temperatures looking into the future, unless, of course, we find a way to manage this increases in greenhouse gas emissions. So on the left is temperature. This is a very obvious trend upwards. For rainfall, it's much less dramatic, but what we see is most of the models are predicting a slight increase in rainfall towards 2100. But what could be more interesting is extreme events that could come. So the way this rainfall is going to increase is perhaps in terms of extreme events that could be very dramatic and disastrous. This is our own analysis for rainfall data in Narok. This is a trend analysis. On the lower side, this is the Narok Town Met station. And we see a slight increase in rainfall as we analyze the rainfall data. If you look across the basin towards the next basin, which is Lake Nakuru, which is just north of the Narok Basin, they are neighboring each other. We notice also a slight increase in rainfall. This is for Egerton University. But what we also notice is this, what we call a break point, starting from year 2010. And this break point is actually significant when we analyze it statistically. That means there is a change in rainfall starting from 2010 going forward. And this is also associated with the rising lake levels, something we have seen in Lake Nakuru. I think many of you are familiar with what has been happening in Lake Nakuru since 2011. For over 10 years, the lake has been rising steadily. And so this phenomenon of increased rainfall is something that is a bit more widespread than just Narok. It cuts across maybe the entire country. It's affecting our climatic patterns. And this is about land cover. In Narok, you see the forests, where the forests are, where agriculture is, and where the grasslands are. You also see here on the southern side, the Masai Mara National Park, and on the northern side, the Mau Forest Complex, which is a protected area. And in the middle, in red, is where Narok Town is. This is a land degradation map showing which areas are under very high degradation in red. You notice that areas surrounding the Mau Forest Complex, and also on the western side in Transmara, we have hotspots of land degradation. Even as you look towards what we are calling the land degradation neutrality, which Kenya has signed to, we know that looking at this county, we have a lot of work to do to convert these spots into green spots where we have very low degradation or nothing happening. Then here is land productivity dynamics. Based on Moody's data from 2001-2016. What we see here in red are areas where we have declining productivity. And in our narrow catchment, you can see that some of the productive areas in the north of the catchment and some of the important quick growing areas in the southern part of that catchment are also under declining productivity or early signs of decline. And this is forest dynamics, where is tree cover change happening. You can see the hotspots just again next to Mount Forest Complex. That's where activity is happening, and also on the western side of the county, just neighboring Masai Mara National Park. This is an area where the Masai people migrate the animals to during the extreme dry seasons, and that's where they do a lot of their grazing. You can see the impact it has on forest tree cover. This is a study that was done by one of the students looking at land cover change in one of the small catchments I call the Kakia Sambulgur. From 1985 to 2019, you see increasing areas being converted from forests and pasture to agriculture, and also you see the increase in build-up areas. You see the very narrow down and growing over the years. And this has implications on hydrology and the response of that catchment. And we see this as we look into the town of Narok. One of the challenges that has been confronting that town is extreme flood events. This is some of the pictures we have taken during our time in research. You can see some obviously dangerous episodes of flood events happening. And the town has tried to tackle this by building canals, but perhaps that's not the solution. The solution is to look further north and ask where this runoff is coming from on the cultivated areas and whether it can be stored there. In 2017 and 2018-19, the flood levels actually in the Narok River damaged the pumping station that supplies Narok town. And this tells us that even with the best efforts towards determining the design plans for this engineering projects, sometimes getting it right is actually a challenge. And this was a project that was funded by JICA. Obviously, scientists and engineers were involved. But 1 year after commissioning, this water project was damaged. Even now, it's not yet back in full production of water. And we have been involved in trying to re-estimate the flood levels and to create a system where we can protect this pumping station. This is one of the models that has been done also by one of the PhD students using what we call hydraulic routing models to estimate how the floods play out in the Narok town. We've been using the latest technologies, developing digital elevation using drone. And we have done a 5 centimeter digital elevation model and used ECROS model to simulate floods in the town. And we have also used the photos that have been taken by people in their normal times during the floods to calibrate the models, which was quite interesting, demonstrating how you can use citizen science to calibrate modeling flood models, even when you don't have data sets existing. So we have spot height in the town where we could tell how high the floods went, and then try to simulate, see our model taking us to those levels that were captured by the photos. And we have also tried to improve the estimation of flood levels of various magnitudes in using various models. Like this is one of the papers that has demonstrated this. And one of the things we realized is that we have scholars from different schools. We have had a School of Building Sciences, professors in civil engineering and also in biosystems engineering involved in this project, and recently also TARE has been involved in the work that is going on here. And very many students coming from many countries. I am counting at the moment more than 10 postgraduate students have been involved here at PhD level and master level, coming from 5 countries in Africa. Maybe still going on. Courtesy of AUSTI and SAWES, we have had the challenge, the privilege of getting students from many places in Africa. This is a paper that is looking at how land use change is affecting the peak discharge in the catchment. The main findings are that land use has a major influence on peak discharge, which is what you can see demonstrated on the right side. If you have the time, you can read the paper for yourself. These are some of the photos in the town. You see cows. Of course, livestock is a major thing in Narok. You also see maize production here. I won't highlight the importance of what we're calling invasive weeds, and these are signs of land degradation. So where they have been growing wheat and maize, I think it would be interesting for some of the people in botany do some research on invasive weeds in this area, which is a big challenge in the county. Ponds, water ponds for water harvesting. This is a study that was done, is being done by one of our PhD students monitoring gully erosion in Narok. You realize that on the left here, the picture of the nice wheat farm, the tree that has been there for more than 20, 30 years is standing on a pedestal, illustrating the 1 meter of soil loss that has taken place on that field. So you can see actually pictures of soil loss that has been lost over the years by just looking at what is visible on the farms. And in the south, on the lower picture here, there's an old man who owns that farm. He has what is called a band land in his farm, a place where nothing grows, and he's consulting here with Sagatahi Mwago on how to restore his land back to productivity. And this is a map of the gully sites that have been monitored. This is a measurement of soil loss in gullies by the PhD students. And we did a study on susceptibility of mapping the erosion susceptibility, gully erosion susceptibility in the Katia Samburu catchment. And the main finding was again that land cover and distance to the road. The roads are a major cause of gully erosion in the roads and cattle tracks in Narok town. And I think the engineers in civil engineering could also contribute towards helping us design roads that are not erodible in places that are very sensitive like this one. And this is a map of the soil erosion prediction using an INVEST model. You notice the red spots. All these red spots are areas where the erosion rates are beyond what we call the tolerable soil rate of 10 tons per hectare per year, meaning that there is a lot of work to do to intervene to reduce the soil loss below 10 tons per hectare per year. And one of the findings that we have found is contour strips, either made of grass, but more importantly, trees, could contribute towards reduction of sediments. And I illustrate this with an example of one of the farms here. You can see this is a 15-acre farm owned by the school and hired out to a person. You can actually see the gullies even on Google Earth. The gullies are very big. They look small here, but when you're on the ground, you realize that they are up to 1 meter deep and still growing. These gullies can be stopped by contour strips of woodlots, especially along the contour. If we can make a compromise that we don't put all the land under but we reserve some of the land for growing trees, this could reduce the soil loss and also fill the gullies. This is a gully erosion susceptibility map that I talked about, illustrating which areas are highly susceptible to erosion. So this is a slide where I highlight some of the issues happening. One of them is charcoal production. It is considered illegal, and you are not allowed to transport charcoal on a motorized vehicle. But you can happily transport a lot of charcoal on donkeys like this. And it's a common feature you see in that catchment. Every morning you see donkeys carrying charcoal towards town. The other challenge with the highly mechanized farming is that people who are doing farm operations, they don't like trees on the farm. They want to have fields where you can move the tractors from one end to another very quickly. And they also don't like terraces. Terraces they consider that this could be land loss, especially when you are leasing land. So most of the people who have had terraces in the past, the people who lease the land have been slowly eating into the terraces and clearing them up. So this is what we say. These are the unsustainable management practices that are contributing to land degradation in this part of the place. So land leasing is a big issue that needs to be regulated. A big number of landowners in Narok don't own the land. They actually lease it out to people. And the tenant farmers obviously don't have an inclination towards long-term soil conservation. And land lease agreements are not usually interested in, taking into consideration soil and water conservation, which is something that we need to have going forward. Yeah, so I will finish with 3 slides that are quite important. One of them is how we can use soils as a reservoir for water storage. I illustrate here that in the case of Tenkara Narok, if you estimate the amount of water that you can store in 1 meter, the deep soil profile, it is equivalent to 2 Yakaini Dam reservoirs. So instead of building reservoirs, you can use your soils to actually store the water. The other thing is that you can use the soils as a store for carbon. For example, I estimate this soil actually store more carbon than above ground biomass. This is the domain of Dr. Shenkuya. But we have a big opportunity to actually store carbon in the soils, which actually takes more than 4 to 40 times more carbon compared to above ground vegetation. So even as we grow the trees, we target the global targets for net zero emissions and perhaps creating opportunities for carbon trading. Another opportunity is biogas. I mentioned that one Maasai person has 1 cow, 2 sheep, and 1 goat. And if you do the mathematics, you realize that every household has a capacity to produce their own biogas. We don't need to cut the trees. We can actually produce enough biogas for every home in Narok. But the problem is we need innovative financing mechanisms so that people can adopt biogas technologies. So as I wind up, some of the opportunities for further research includes looking at crops and livestock breeds that are better adapted to emerging climate patterns, regulating the use of leased land. That's a policy intervention maybe at the county level, perhaps also at the national level. Promotion of soil conservation of crop under existing land, erosion control using innovative methods. One of the challenges with the seed growing in Narok is, of course, all the goats running around will eat any seedling that we plant. So we need some ways to manage that. The design and construction of roads in these highly erodible areas, civil engineers will also intervene there. Innovative ways of tree planting, protection of trees from animals, then promotion of biogas. Biogas is a big thing, especially with this high population of animals. There is a chance actually to intervene in biogas by both technology and financing, efficient stocks, kitchen gardens in rural homes. Runoff harvesting and aquifer, managed aquifer research is also an area of research that we have not quite exploited. And a very big area for people in especially animal production is this research on how people can manage the grazing areas in these agro-pastoral systems like Narok. And then looking at profitability of different land use systems, climate services, strengthening climate services for livestock and crops. And the second last bullet is about socio-cultural aspects that are hindering sustainable land management. We have done a lot talking about the risks of soil erosion and talking about technologies that can reverse soil erosion in Narok. But we don't see a lot of uptake. In some cases, we even lay down the terraces and then they are destroyed with time. And we realize that the biggest elephant is actually this socio-cultural aspects. And we need more than just engineers and natural scientists to crack this problem. We need people who can understand the society and how the behavior systems and how they influence uptake of technologies. We are also working towards improving the flood estimation techniques, not only for Narok, but also for other areas in the country, how we can improve the flood discharge estimation in our rivers so that we don't end up in structures that are being destroyed from time to time as the climate change progresses. And I want to end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Gadenya, for that quite informative presentation, particularly on land management, which also cut across water and all other aspects. And I think we are well informed. So we are going to have a session for questions, but that will come after all the presenters have done their presentations. So right now, in the interest of time, I would want to invite the next presenter, who is Professor John Wesonga, who will be presenting on climate smart agriculture technologies. Professor Wesonga will be joining us. He's online. And welcome, Professor Wesonga. I hope you can be able to hear us.
Yes, Hosea, I hope you can also hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, I'll pick from there. Just a minute, let me share my slides. Okay. You confirm if you can see the slides, then I can proceed.
Yes, we can see them.
Yes, so yeah, thank you very much for organizing this seminar where we share some of our perspectives and what we are doing in the area of climate change. Yeah, I'm to share with you something on climate smart agriculture, as they call it, but I changed it because yeah, sometimes we talk of technologies, innovations, and management practices as some of the outputs from our research. So this is a term that was crafted sometimes back by Carlo, and I thought it is an interesting one. So it's just semantics, but more or less meaning the same things. So I will share with you some of the things we have been doing and some of the insights I've drawn regarding climate smart. Okay. Yeah, so definition, I thought I start off by defining, and fortunately, Professor Gadenya already gave us a definition. I think there are different authorities that have given definition. I picked one from World Bank. There is Concern Worldwide and FAO. And all of them, of course, talk about integrating various activities to be able to address issues of climate change. So in the case of World Bank, they talk of landscapes, and the focus is to try and address the challenges affecting food security and, of course, climate change. The World Concern talks about resilience, productivity, how to ensure that under the changing climate. And FAO, which is of course close to us, it talks about agri-food system transformation that are green and climate resilient. So I think if you look at the definition, then it calls, I think, for us to address two things, I think, which have already been alluded by Professor Gadenya. One is what we will call the mitigation, basically trying to deal with the issue of the drivers of climate change. And the other side is the adaptation, where we try to see how to live with the already bad situation that we are faced with. And so I'll try to take you through some of the aspects. And just as background, usually this is, I think, the thinking that what is causing the climate change is basically the accumulation of greenhouse gases. So on this side, we have a situation where we don't have elevated greenhouse gases, and therefore that allows some of the heat to escape from the atmosphere. While on this other side, we have accumulation of greenhouse gases, consist of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, which forms then a thicker layer, more or less like a thick blanket, and then that prevents escape of the heat waves from the atmosphere, and that leads to the warming of the earth. And that warming, of course, has its own consequences, as we shall see. Now, I just thought it is good to have an idea of how agriculture is contributing to this bad situation. So we, as agriculture, we are contributing through production of carbon dioxide emissions through some of the activities. Mainly, I think some of the activities that you will see here, for example, when we burn crop residue, that contributes to carbon dioxide emissions. Methane is also contributed. Nitrous oxide is contributed. During manuring, use of farm manure, on the farm, we have nitrous oxide emitted. We have also methane being produced from our livestock activities. So both through, when we keep the animals, there is what we call enteric fermentation, which produces the methane gas, but also the manure, when it is not well managed, also that contributes to production of methane. And then the use of fertilizers also contributes. Rice, for example, where we grow rice, because there is the wetting and drying of the soils, that also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. So basically here I'm trying to show you that we have a lot of our own role that we play in making this climate change a bigger problem. But at the same time, of course, we know that agriculture, being dependent on the environment, also suffers greatly, and we shall be looking at what we need to do. And maybe for most people, this is not new. But if you look at normally most of when we talk about the greenhouse gases, usually carbon dioxide is taken as the standard, and then these others, the methane and nitrous oxide, are related to it. So you'll hear about a carbon dioxide equivalent. And so here from some literature, you see like methane, its equivalent is 25. So that means one, say, mole of methane has the same effect as 25 moles of carbon dioxide. And methane usually has a slightly shorter life cycle. It's estimated to be around 12 years. Some of the sources, agricultural sources, include decaying of organic matter from the domestic animals through the enteric fermentation and the manure. And then nitrous oxide, you can see it's even much more potent. The potency is around 298, not 298.25. Sorry, the 25 year is not supposed to be there. So it has around almost 300 potency compared to carbon dioxide, and it has a very long lifetime, almost 114 years. And some of we see from agriculture, the use of nitrogen fertilizers is really the culprit, whether they are coming from inorganic fertilizers or manures, or also from decay of crop residue, all these can contribute to emission of nitrous oxide. So I think understanding how some of these things happen and our role, then we can be able to participate in either coming up or embracing technologies that can help us cut down on emissions from agriculture, and therefore play our role in slowing down the warming, as it were. And then some of the impacts that we see, we have, I think already, Professor Gathenya has already shown us how temperatures are rising. And to me, that is a very consistent pattern. So I think from wherever you look, you will see evidence that temperatures are rising. And with the rise in temperature, there are other effects that come in. So for example, for us in agriculture, we know most of our pests, usually their distribution is dependent on temperature. So if you have very cool conditions, sometimes some pests are not a big problem. But so when the temperatures become elevated, then you find that certain pests start emerging that were previously not there. Again, you find that their life cycles then become shorter because they're able to develop much faster than usually they would under low temperatures. And therefore, as a result of these elevated temperatures, we start seeing new pests arising. So, for example, previously we didn't have this problem of Tuta absoluta, which is one of the biggest problems in tomatoes. Things like fall armyworms, yes, we think that they could be related to the global warming that is allowing some of these pests to spread, especially into geographies where they were not previously present. And then the population, their population is increasing much faster because of the shortened life cycle. Then I have not mentioned here, but I'm sure some of the colleagues that are in the house, especially I know Professor Grace Njoroge works with the pollinators. Yeah, there is potentially also effect on beneficial organisms such as the pollinators, and we know that pollinators play a very big role in crop production. So if they are also impacted, then especially negatively, then that also has implication on our crop production. And then, of course, rainfall. Rainfall, usually we have quite some mixed feeling. I know many times when people talk about climate change, I think the thinking and the focus is mainly on drought. So this is a scenario that is commonly used to present climate change with respect to rainfall. But we also know that when we have extreme events, we can also have flooding, which is also another big problem for crops. Most crops are not adapted to growing under flooded conditions. So you will also have the same problems. Then we also have, of course, seasonal changes. Seasons are changing. I think Professor Gathenya indicated the fact that we are going to have maybe more rain. I think the trends show that. The problem sometimes is the distribution. So you may find that you may have more rain, but that rain is only restricted to maybe a few months of the year, and that becomes a challenge by itself. So it causes flooding, which is a problem, and then the rest of the year may be still dry. So yeah, at least some of the whatever literature we have seen, there is tendency to suggest that the total rainfall doesn't seem to change much. If you're looking at the annual rainfall, it doesn't seem to change. What is the biggest problem is the distribution of that rain, which is not very good for crop production. So understanding that these are some of the impacts that we can expect, and these are just some of them. The others, of course, things to do with the quality, sometimes also yield factors. For example, when we have some of these extreme conditions, we can have, for example, flower abortion, and therefore for fruiting crops, that becomes a problem. So there are many other effects, but these are some of the primary effects. And therefore, for me, when I think about climate smart, then I'm looking at how do we address the challenges associated with elevated temperature? What are the challenges associated with either extreme drought, so lack of rain, or if we have flooding, so what are the options that we can have? And how do we deal with emerging pests? And perhaps how would we deal with the protection of our other biodiversity that is necessary for us to produce? So, I mean, dealing with those impacts, for me, that is what would go into climate smart agriculture. And so when I present, I think what next will be the climate smart, I will be focusing on how we are trying to deal with this. So I already said, when we are talking about climate smartness, for me, we have to look at both mitigation and then adaptation. So in the case of mitigation, basically we are trying to fight the climate change. So we don't want to let it just continue. While when we are looking at adaptation, we are more looking at how do we survive under the changing coexistence, more or less. But both of them, to me, are critical components that we have to look at, so that at the same time, while we protect the environment, we also are able to produce our food. And generally, the general principles, I think that for me, I look at is there are four main, I think, components that I feel are critical. So first, would focus on a reduction of emission. And some of them is, for example, use of renewable energy, because in farming, we also need a lot of energy to be able to do our farming. And therefore, the kind of energy that we use can be part of our climate smartness. So if we use renewable energy, for example, solar power, that would be part of our contribution to slowing down the emissions and therefore, reducing the impact that will arise out of that. Then the other aspect is reducing the greenhouse gases, and we have potential. I think as in agriculture for us, for example, through the plants, we can be able to absorb some of the CO2 from the environment and therefore reduce the greenhouse gas that is contained. And that's why practices such as agroforestry become quite important. Professor Gadenya has told us about how the soil is even a better store. Maybe what we need to look at is what are the practices that can then, farming practices that can promote the storage of carbon in the soil, so that we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and other compounds. And here I've just tried to illustrate nutrient management as one of the ways in which we can address some of these problems, especially of dealing with the greenhouse gases. And so one of them is, I think, soil testing becomes very critical, because I think it is recognized that in Kenya sometimes application of fertilizer is being done without any soil testing, and occasionally fertilizers are being applied when they shouldn't. And I think there are reports that have shown that if we were just to manage the soil pH of our soils, we can probably release some of the nutrients that are held up within some of the soil matrices. And so soil testing, I think, would be one of the climate smart options that we have. And so we can think about how do we enhance utilization of soil testing services. There are usually challenges around there in terms of lack of facilities for testing and costs associated with that. And then just knowledge dissemination on farmers on the correct use of fertilizer so that it doesn't have negative effect, both ecological as well as economical. Because under some conditions, if you apply fertilizers, that fertilizer basically goes to waste, and therefore economically it's not helpful because it doesn't translate into increase in yields. But at the same time, it goes maybe to contaminate other, environment situations, say water bodies or soil, and ultimately maybe you have problems like now eutrophication and other problems that we know is associated with that. We can also look at improved fertilizer production. So we have slow or control release fertilizers that can also help us in management in the emissions. And then split up application of fertilizers can also be. So these can help us to lower some of the emissions that are coming out of our production system. And then on this other side, we can also look at what we are doing, our lifestyle, what we are eating, because I think whatever our consumption, of course, creates demand for certain foods. And it has been found that if we were to change our dietary patterns, then we can perhaps influence what needs to be produced. And that way, we can contribute to this problem of climate change. So some people think that maybe vegans or vegetarians are more climate friendly than people who are consuming a lot of meat. So I don't know whether we should rethink our eating of nyama choma, but I think that is open for debate. Then the other bigger problem is post-harvest losses. After we have incurred all the costs ecologically and economically, we find that a lot of what is produced goes to waste. And there are many factors that are contributing to that. I think conservative estimates put post-harvest losses at around 30% on average. If you look at horticulture, some of the products that are highly perishable, those losses can go beyond 50%, maybe upwards of 70%. So it is thought that if we can actually cut down on these post-harvest losses and waste, then maybe we can also reduce the burden that we are exerting on the environment. And of course, producing greenhouse gases and what have you. So it means that if any effort that goes towards post-harvest losses, and this goes maybe improving infrastructure, because that's partly the problem that we face, that we get sorry guys, I seem to have lost connection. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof.
Sorry,
Yes.
it went dead suddenly. Okay, sorry, let me get back. Are you able to see my slides again now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, so I was just saying that perhaps we need to change maybe our dietary habits. Perhaps we need to look at how we deal with post-harvest losses as part of our climate smartness. I think this has already been mentioned in our cropping. I think we need to think about what we do with some of the waste that is generated on the farm. And this could either be the dung that comes from the animals, or could also be some of the biomass, because we can also generate biogas from this. And this way, of course, partly it will help us to manage the methane and CO2 that is produced from the systems, but also it can help us to cut down on the use of fossil fuel, which is partly driving some of the climate change. Sometimes I wonder why we don't really take this as one of our main focus. After all, from even an economic point of view, I always thought that if we were to keep our animals for biogas production, maybe the farmers would make more money than the focus that we have on dairy. So sometimes I think maybe milk should have been a byproduct of this whole process. Yeah, and Then at national, I think level, I just wanted to highlight, we have this, what is called nationally determined contribution NDCs, and Kenya has committed to reduce its carbon emissions by 32%. I think relative to some target that was set, I think around 2016 or thereabout. There is some commitments on budget. Yeah, but I think this is something from government, so I just picked from there. And what we can do, of course, for us, we can try to contribute to this through some of our activities. Of course, tree planting is one of the things that is being pushed by the country, but usually the question I ask is, I don't know how many of these trees that are planted usually survive. And usually I have thought about, there are some innovative technologies that can be used for tree establishment that are being used in desert areas. For example, in Dubai, in China, we have some technologies like Groas's Growbox. We have technologies like cocoon tree planting technology, which can help us establish these trees a bit better. But basically, and to me, I thought that is an area where our knowledge institution and ourselves maybe could contribute. So we could be looking at how do we contribute to the tree planting so that we can establish our tree cover and contribute to this carbon sequestration. So besides, of course, the normal tree planting that is happening. So it's an area that would be interesting. We are working a bit on that. And I just wanted to show here. So with the students, we started this initiative, we are calling it Comrades Against Biodiversity Loss and Climate Change. And here we trying to mobilize our students to try and set up nurseries so that they can provide seedlings for tree planting. And the focus is more on the indigenous trees because many a times I see the trees that are being planted are exotic, not so many of our indigenous trees. And if we were to do that, I think we can be able to also conserve our indigenous bioresources, which then can help us also to mitigate. In any case, we would think that these trees would be more adapted than the exotic trees. And perhaps with that, we can also look into carbon trading. I think there was some seminar on carbon trading, which is associated with the tree planting and what have you. But this is an initiative where we are trying to rally our students, knowing that they are energetic and try to get them into appreciating. And what for me I consider, and we are working now with the students as a niche, is the use of indigenous trees. Now, there was just to finish with the mitigation, there was some analysis that was done to look at the potential of some of these interventions to mitigate. And you can see the suggestion is that changing our dietary habit has a great potential to drive mitigation, followed by soil carbon. Agroforestry is ranked fairly low. I didn't do this work, so I'm not sure, but I just picked, and it shows that perhaps we might want to also think about this. I'm not sure that this is a very critical discussion that we have in our country, and maybe we can also generate local evidence to see whether some of these things, to what extent they can help us address the carbon emissions. But in our own way, I think some of the things, again, I'm trying to do with the students to address some of these is looking at now alternatives, because if we are going to change diet, then that means we also have to produce the kind of food that we think would contribute to cutting down on emissions. So, for example, small animals are thought that, for example, rabbits would have lower carbon footprint compared to, say, a dairy cow. And so we are trying to work with the students to try and see whether this rabbit farming and consumption can be enhanced. They are also considered to be safer in terms of cholesterol levels and things like that. And then, of course, insects for food, which is being, of course, Jomo Kenyatta is leading by Dr. Kinyuru. could also be a way of driving people into consumption of insects, which are also considered to be have less carbon footprints. Then how do we feed our livestock? Of course, there are people who will not be happy to feed on insects, so maybe we can produce the milk or the meat from insect-based feeds. So maybe that can also be an interesting area. Hydroponic fodder is another way of growing our feed for the livestock. We consider that also a climate smart. And then irrigation. You know, Kenya is considered to be a water deficit country, and the situation is only getting worse with increasing population as well as the climate change. And so looking at some water saving technologies becomes very critical. And I have been working with the capillary wick irrigation systems for a long time. And I'll just show you some of the different systems that we have been able to develop. Previously, we were doing it in containerized systems, but now we are able to do it on the ground. I will be able to share some of the things we have been doing. And then apart from, so in the capillary wick, we use the fabric to move the water, but we can also redesign and have self-wicking systems that also uses capillarity, but then we can also use them for growing. What we find is that with these capillary wick systems, we can save up to over 60% of water, and therefore the limited water that we have, we can use them more efficiently. And then, of course, we have the domain of improved seeds and drought-tolerant crops. But there is a big debate about seed because there are people who think that we should keep to our traditional seeds. And so here, I'm just illustrating. So I said initially we were doing capillary wick mainly in the containers, but now we have developed a capillary wick which we can actually do on the ground. So here some work that is being done in some of the dry areas of the country. This is somewhere in Kakuma, where this irrigation system was set up. So showing how we set up the system. And then here is showing a crop growing. This is in Somalia. This is somewhere in Somalia. And under the extreme condition, you can see a very nice crop that is able to grow under these extreme conditions. So communities in these areas can have access to vegetables. Then we have some other crops that are more adapted to these dry conditions. For example, dragon fruit, which is basically a cactus. It is a xerophyte, so it is well adapted to these maybe dry conditions, which I think we are facing, and higher temperatures. We know that currently in Kenya, dragon fruits are very expensive. I think a kilo of dragon fruit is going for 1,000 shillings or thereabout. Maybe if we increase production, we can reduce those prices, and then people can afford. And in terms of nutrition, the dragon fruits are highly nutritious. From literature, I think they are very comparable to some of the fruits that are promoted. And therefore, this becomes quite attractive as an alternative that can be promoted and economically feasible. But with the time, of course, once people embrace it, maybe the prices, if people are going in for economic reasons, maybe things will change. I think we all remember the story of the quail. Nobody's talking about the quail anymore. And maybe some people might think maybe this is a quail story. But at least from a climate smart perspective, I think this has potential to help us address some of the issues. And then this is just a simple moist bed that can be established, and we can do it at household level. I know some of the questions people ask me is, but can you do these things on a large scale? And usually the response I give is that, of course, large scale is a good option, but also small scale can still work. I always think that if we had more households being able to produce some of their food, and if we have technologies for that, in any case, we can reduce the carbon footprint associated with producing food from far distances, and transporting it. So in a way, producing food at the local scale can also be climate smart in itself, and therefore can contribute. Then we have other efficient irrigation systems. For example, drip irrigation. This is the normal drip irrigation system that is used, but we can also have subsurface drip irrigation. So in this case, instead of having drip lines installed on the surface, the drip lines are installed below the ground. And the advantage with that is that it's easier to undertake management on land because you don't have drip lines that are obstructing your practices, but also you are applying water below the soil, so evaporational losses are much less. And not much is happening in the country, but we have at least some work happening, and some of our students are doing this in Germany, and we hope that we can also bring this into the country. Then mulching, of course, can also help. We can cut down on evaporational losses and then be able to utilize the water a bit more efficiently. Then we have hydroponic systems, which can, if we design them nicely, these are simplified hydroponic system that can be set up, and we can utilize also the vertical space so that we can really use the limited space more efficiently, and this can work quite well. Again, maybe on a smaller scale, but could be expanded. I think this is growing a lot in other developed countries, but I think we are trying to catch up also with coming up with some of these innovations. And then shading is very critical because of the elevated temperature. From my experience, we don't seem to be paying a lot of attention to increasing temperature, yet that is consistently being shown as one trend that we increasingly are getting higher temperatures. And so what we have done, some of the work we are doing in Marsabit is, if we combine the shading together with the capillary wick irrigation, then we are able to produce the vegetables very well for the communities. Of course, the question people will ask, but these are nomadic communities. We think they also need to consume at least vegetables so that we can address what we call hidden hunger. Because what we find is that some of these communities do not take in a lot of foods that are rich in vitamins and other minerals, and therefore they could suffer some of what we call hidden hunger. So this is part of it, but we are also planning to try and include fodder so that they can also get something for their livestock. This is just, again, some vertical farming system so that we can efficiently utilize our space. Then the other domain, I think, is the whole area of climate and weather information services. In my view, I think we always need to understand what is happening and where things are going. And it was nice, I think, to see some of the trends that we were seeing from Professor Gadenya's presentation. We have also been doing some work in this area. This is not our own, but this is an app that is developed by Carro. So it can give you some ideas on the weather that is prevailing, and then this can inform some of the decisions. But from some of our work, we have developed what we call the Climate Atlas. And using the Climate Atlas, we can be able to look at the scenarios at our local level. So if you go to this atlas, you can be able to look at different scenarios. So you can look at the current time, different parameters, so average maximum temperature, average minimum temperature, number of days where temperatures exceed maybe 20 degrees, number of days where average temperature exceeds 30 degrees, or where it exceeds 38 degrees. So we think that with this kind of interactive system, we can be able to have an idea on the expected changes in our local situation, and then whatever adaptation measures can then be tailored towards that. Because one of my problem has always been, yes, we talk about climate change, but we need to understand how we shall get it at our level. So using the tool, some of the patterns I think are very similar to what Professor Gadenya was showing us. So current time, this is based on Kajiado. In Kajiado, some locations in Kajiado, the projection, the current scenario is that these bars here, these are showing what is currently the temperature, the average temperature. And then these are what is projected in future. And what you see, we have some threshold for crop production. For example, for tomatoes, we use a threshold of around 28 degrees, above which yields of tomatoes are going to be affected. So when we look at this, we will see that in future, most of the temperatures are going to exceed the threshold for production of tomatoes, except, so we will have this narrow window during which we can perhaps produce tomatoes effectively. And then in terms of rainfall, we also see this is the situation. So this is the current patterns of the rainfall. So this is the current situation, and this is the future scenario. So you can also see there is a tendency for rainfall increases compared to the current scenario. But you see during the window when we have the temperatures appropriate for production, the rainfall is quite low. And from our judgment is that maybe this will not be sufficient. And so based on this scenario modeling, some of the recommendation we have is rainwater harvesting. So when we have a lot of rain, preceding the suitable period when we can grow tomatoes, unless of course we have interventions to address the elevated temperature, then we can harvest water during this period and then try to produce our tomato during this window when we have a favorable temperature condition. So basically, just to show you how we can now try to utilize some of the climate and weather information to try and adapt our farming systems to work better under the conditions that we are faced with. So I think to end my presentation, in my view, is that some of the areas we need to prioritize is trying to understand local scenarios of what is likely going to happen, and then we can work out measures that can address the problems that we are facing. Then the other thing is having strategic responsive actions. Of course, responsive meaning that we are responding to the kind of scenarios that we have. Then to me, I think focusing on temperature rises is going to be critical, looking at plant species, plant varieties that will be able to withstand those extreme temperatures, or having technologies and management practices that can perhaps lower the temperature so that the crops can be able to be grown. And then, of course, having partnerships. When Professor Gadenya was presenting, just remembered we have a project where we are going to try and extend the work that we did in Kajiado on the climate atlas. So we did Kajiado and Kiambu, and we have got some EU funding. We are going to move into Narok. And I think that, what I saw Professor Gadenya present, I think would be an interesting one for us to see how to partner, so that then we can see how to combine what they already are doing and what we shall be doing with the climate atlas, so that we can develop responsive interventions on climate change. So this is what I prepared to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Songa, for that. Another quite informative presentation, particularly with the regard of agriculture, looking at the ways how agriculture contributes to climate change and the ways to mitigate, practices that can be able to mitigate climate change from agriculture, and also some of the adaptation measures that the farmers can take into. So we really thank you for that, Professor Songo. So we still keep our questions. There are some who are already typing in the public chat. That's still welcome, and we'll still have another chance at the end of that presentation, which we are just getting into, where you can be able to ask your questions. So we'll directly now go to that presentation by Dr. Amos Mbugua. Here we'll be talking about climate change and health. So Dr. Mbugua is around. So Dr. Mbugua, welcome and for your presentation. All right, maybe we can give him some few minutes. With some few connection issues that is trying to make, so just a few minutes and then just starting. We are trying to address it now.
Okay, so we'll be starting shortly. Hope my screen can now be seen.
I can see it from my side.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll proceed with what I will consider a relatively short presentation on the impact of climate change and health in Africa. And I've entitled this Issues and Research Opportunities. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share a few thoughts on the impact of climate change on health. Okay, so I want to just start with what may be very basic, but I think it's also good to start with definitions for those who may not be very familiar or have not been in the climate change space for a while. So when we're referring to climate change, essentially we're talking about really significant variations in the Earth's climate. That is temperature, rainfall patterns, wind over very long periods of time. And this can either be happening naturally. So I think it's very important to note that, because the assumption may always be that climate change is necessarily only due to human interventions or human activities. But climate changes actually do happen for natural causes. But the concern is the impact of human activity resulting in changes in climate. And these are primarily due to the current models of energy production and consumption, which have been touched on to some extent by the previous speakers. Again, these other speakers have already touched on a little bit of the background, but again, it's important, I think, to highlight where the problem is coming from and what the causes are, and as a result of those effects, what the effects would be. So essentially, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about emission of greenhouse gases that interfere with the normal temperature ranges that are experienced across the planet. And this could be due to various factors: the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation activities, agriculture, livestock farming that has already been touched on, that all result in increase in the greenhouse gases. And this with high levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, that translates to retention of heat, and hence what we call global warming. And this damages the natural balance and increases the temperature, the relative temperature globally. So in terms of in Africa, and if you think about what we have been seeing over the recent past years, you see increases of cases of drought, flooding, there are heat waves, which are believed to be very closely attributed to the changes in the global climate. And how does that now relate to health? Part of these what would be seen as a result of these natural disasters is, if you're talking about heat waves, exhaustion, stroke, cramp, cerebrovascular diseases, respiratory disease, and even death. When you talk about drought, the impact of that, it's associated with malnutrition, it's associated with other diseases, and increased risk of those diseases, including diseases like malaria. When you're talking about flooding, the immediate effects would include increased risk of drowning, there's physical harm, in areas, for example, I think we talked about, that has already been touched on, where you have lakes increasing in the flooding or increased levels of lakes, you get movement of animals, including snakes, and you get increased likelihood of snake bites as a result of that. So there are multiple downstream effects that come from the changes in climate, and that's really what I want to touch on. I will say at the onset that this discussion is not going to be very exhaustive, but I will pick and choose on certain aspects that I'm more familiar with and more relating to, but also with this current slide, just to sample the diversity of areas in health that are impacted by climate change. But to start off, the real connection between climate change and health is increased vulnerability. Okay, and that increased vulnerability can be due to what we call vulnerability factors, but also exposure pathways that interrelate now with existing health system structures. So the point that this slide seeks to make is that the impact of climate change would vary depending on the context that we're talking about. And where you've got contexts where there are buffers and systems in place to minimize vulnerability or minimize exposure, then the impact of climate change is deemed to a certain extent. Now, the reality is on the African continent, we, unfortunately, because of the socioeconomic conditions and other challenges that are already existing, are more exposed to the risks of vulnerability and have a higher chance of being exposed to many of these natural disasters. So that's what we are calling these exposure pathways. So there could be extreme weather events, heat stress, changes in air quality, water quality and quantity will also be impacted, food security and safety. And the aspect which I'm going to focus on is a lot to do with vector-borne diseases and how do infectious diseases, how are they impacted by changes in climate change. So at the very bottom here, we have, you have a selection of areas or increased health risks that are climate sensitive, areas that are impacted by climate change. So for instance, we can have increased injury and mortality from extreme weather events. Another area is heat-related illnesses, which may not seem very serious, but the fact is the human body actually functions within a very narrow temperature range. And if you increase the temperature by 2, 3, 4 degrees, you will actually get serious impacts of heat-related illnesses. Respiratory illnesses are another area that will be impacted, another outcome that we are affected. And as I said, I'm going to be focused on waterborne diseases, zoonosis, and vector-borne diseases that are a subset of the health outcomes that will be impacted by climate change. As already mentioned previously, malnutrition and foodborne diseases would significantly increase, as well as non-communicable diseases, and also psychosocial and mental health would be also impacted by climate change. So the point that we want to make is that it may not always be apparent, but climate change can have very, very, very broad impacts on health. In fact, as I was thinking about this presentation, I was realizing that the reason why I think climate change has very broad effects is that it's altering the entire ecosystem. So all elements within the ecosystem, the global ecosystem that we are operating in, will be affected by these climate change factors. On the right here, we are talking even about health systems and facilities that already exist. Now, these would be strained, and therefore the impacts on healthcare facilities and also health systems is an area that inevitably needs to be looked at, even when one is interrogating the impact of climate change on health. So as I said, I'm going to, this slide is not moving. Okay, so let me start with this quote. And And what it says here is that the majority of the pathological infectious, susceptible to pathological infectious diseases whose life cycle are sensitive to environmental factors. And what we're saying is that there are certain diseases that are very sensitive to changes in the environment, changes in water, changes in air, changes in soil. And that becomes the link to how these diseases are affected by changes in climate change. A subset of these diseases that I'm going to be referring to will be the neglected tropical diseases. Now, these neglected tropical diseases include some of the following. This is, the WHO actually has defined a collection of about 20 diseases, which are referred to as neglected tropical diseases. They vary. Some of them are viral in origin, some are protozoan, some are bacteria, others are worms, or otherwise referred to as helminths. So there's a very broad range of diseases that fall under the NTD cluster. And each of these are very many times impacted by either water quality or soil quality, or even issues to do with the vectors, that is, insects that are involved in their transmission. So anything that will impact on water, anything that will impact on soil, anything that will impact on the breeding and the dispersion of insects will inevitably translate to increased incidence of these diseases. In 2021, the World Health Organization published what it calls a roadmap for effective increased control of these diseases, as well as activities towards their elimination. Now, what I wanted to show here is to try to now bring us more to what we are seeing and hearing today relating to climate change. And so here, these are two news articles. Okay, the one on the left is from the Standard newspaper here in Kenya. And what was reported, and a number of us may recall this, was the reporting of a new species, okay, discovered in Kenya that is spreading actually in Kenya, and it's going to be very likely responsible for more infections and disease transmission. So another species of mosquito, Anopheles stephensi. Now, in Kenya, we have other species of mosquito that are involved in transmission. But what is of concern here is that we are seeing increased emergence of new vectors in areas where previously they were not being found, okay? And so this is very likely to be as a result of changes in the geographical and environmental and climatic conditions that make it much more feasible for an insect or a vector which was could not survive or could not breed in certain areas to now be found in other areas. And what that translates to is increased risk of disease transmission. That is just a very tangible example of the link between climate change and disease transmission. On the right, this is a BBC article referring actually to the same mosquito, which is also being found in many other parts of Africa, in Ghana, Nigeria, Sudan. And so what this is showing, and this is representative of what I would say the growing threat, because this may be happening for malaria, but it's likely that it's also happening for other infections, where now the regions of endemicity are broadening and shifting and changing. And hence, it's important to be aware of what is happening in terms of areas of new emergence or spread of diseases. So as a result of that, the WHO has also published a new manual aimed at defining the kind of activities or research initiatives that need to be put in place so as to mitigate these threats. Some of the points here are increased collaboration, strengthening surveillance, developing guidance on how to address these challenges, and also prioritizing research that focuses on disease surveillance. So that's an example of malaria, but I want to show that this is not only affecting Africa or affecting a disease like malaria. This also affects another disease like dengue. Now, I want to quote, this is a publication that was published, a commentary made in Nature, 13th of October, just earlier this month. And the title of that was Neglected Tropical Diseases Go Global. Okay? And so I'll read out the quotation. It says, the bulk of this disease burden, and that's referring to dengue, falls on low and middle income countries in the tropics and subtropics. But the patterns of disease spread are changing. And that was what is noteworthy. So as the world warms, the mosquitoes carrying the virus are thriving and pushing beyond borders. So dengue is increasingly popping up in the USA and in Europe. So you see certain diseases that historically would have been said to for developing are found in tropics or subtropics because of shifts in climate change, is causing emergence in areas which previously did not have those diseases. And we, in my opinion, actually are only scratching the surface when it comes to it, because a lot of work has not yet really been done to look at disease transmission of non-endemic diseases in areas which they are not really expected to be. Okay? So in terms of impacts of climate change, therefore, on tropical disease in Africa, these are a few things that I'll just point out. Number one is, as I said, spread of vector-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue fever. Why is that? When we talk about vector-borne diseases, for those who may not be in health, we're referring to diseases that are transmitted by insects. And so if you're getting insects now finding new areas where they can thrive, new areas where they can breed, new areas where, you know, that they can be found, then the diseases that they carry will also similarly be transmitted into those new areas. Another second area is what we're calling the effect of changing climatic patterns on waterborne diseases like cholera and schistosomiasis. So again, if you're talking about areas having flooding, as we've already touched on, then you're going to get areas where you're getting pockets of water and emergence of waterborne diseases in areas which maybe historically have not had those diseases. Okay? And even if they have, because of increased quantities of water, then the burden of those diseases will similarly increase because of, you know, the changes in the abundance and in the prevalence of water. Thirdly, is what is directly associated with global warming is the influence of rising temperatures will also result in increased prevalence of neglected tropical diseases. Now, this point relates to the fact that there's a lot of efforts to try to manage, control, and work towards disease elimination. But if you're getting shifts in climate change, shifts in the temperature, then this can lead to a reversal of progress made in disease control. And therefore, you get now the prevalence of a lot of these diseases that we've assumed are declining will now start to reemerge. So how is this happening? How are these issues happening? They're happening through expansion of disease geographic range. They're happening through, as I said, increased incidence or cases of neglected tropical diseases, whether it's bacterial, viral, even helminth diseases. And also, and this is also important, the impact on disease seasonality. Because again, when we talk about endemic diseases, they are often have a temporal component to them, in addition to the spatial aspect. That is to say that many of these diseases typically are transmitted during maybe the wet season or around that time. But if you're getting climate changes, that is disrupting what we call the typical wet seasons, dry season, short rain, long rain periods. And as a result, that will impact on the disease seasonality and transmission dynamics. I just want to show a little bit of some studies. Now, some of these are not directly done from climate change, but they could be suggestive of the impact of climate change. Now, this is a study that was done looking at the impact of the National School-Based Deworming Program here in Kenya over a period of time. And this program has been going on for very many years. What I just want to point out is this slide at the bottom looks at 3 different helminths: Trichuris trichura, Ascaris lumbricoid, and hookworms. And then on the top left is actually looking at the combination of all 3. And in terms of monitoring the prevalence, the change in prevalence over years. The point I just want to draw here is that despite the continued use of the school-based deworming program, we have not quite yet seen a complete elimination of these STHs. In fact, if you look at the graph, you see a decline, then an increase, a decline and an increase. One of the suggestions we had thought, and we did a study with a master's student of mine, was the possibility of drug resistance. Could there be drug resistance parasites that are leading to, the continued presence of these helminths? What we found, at least from our study, was that is not the case. The issue that I want to just point out here is there could be an impact of climate that is not being interrogated when we're looking at disease prevalence, as I had mentioned previously. This is another study that I'm currently doing with another master's student, and is looking at another neglected tropical disease, what is called onchocerciasis, transmitted by a worm called Onchocerca volvidus. And the goal of this project really is to see whether we have ongoing transmission in Kenya today. Why is this important? Many who may be familiar with this particular disease, also known as river blindness, would know that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there's a lot of work that was done, larvicidal activity, to try to clear the vector, which is called the black fly. At that time, it was considered that the disease had been effectively eliminated. 6 years later, we have not had any current studies to know whether that truly is the case. And the reason why this is important is because Kenya has not gotten WHO certification of elimination of this disease. And to do that, we would need to generate evidence supporting that this disease is no longer being transmitted, the vector is no longer present. And that's part of what this particular study is working towards generating data. Why is this important? Given the impact of cross-border movements of populations, as well as climate change, it is very likely that you may get actually re-emergence of diseases that have been previously assumed to have been eliminated. And so, as I said, this is an ongoing study. We'll be able to know whether this really is the case with regards to river blindness in Kenya. But I've selected these two, at least from the work I'm involved in, just to paint a broad picture of the risks associated with climate change when we're talking about disease transmission. This study actually is being done in the base of the Mount Elgon region in the areas of Malakisi and Kapsopon. So again, we have done some preliminary analysis, and it's suggestive, at this point we want to confirm, but it's suggestive that we may be actually getting evidence of the black fly. So again, we will have to confirm that, because if we actually get evidence that the black fly is present, then that it could strongly suggest that the disease may be re-emerging in the area. But again, part of this project would be, even if we get the black flies, be able to actually do molecular characterization and determine whether they actually are infected with the helminth itself. So the point I wanted to make, and that I would want to draw us to the relationship between climate change and health is this: there is a possibility of increased risk. And that increased risk is a result of, one, the hazard coming from climate change, because you're talking about disruption of the health infrastructure. We're talking about exposure to flooding and other factors. So there's the hazards that the climate change is bringing, but then there's the unique characteristics of the populations we're dealing with. Populations vary, as I said, as far as vulnerability, and vary also as far as exposure. So being able
I lost Doc. I don't know whether it's my net.
And I just want to point out in this second section, which is talking about outputs, and that is how climate change, which is indicated as inputs on the very leftmost column, the climate change impacts on life cycle alteration. Okay, so microorganisms or these pathogens, and that's what actually translates to the increased hazard. As Prof. Wesonga was talking about, part of the responses would be understanding the mitigation efforts, and as well as what adaptive responses can be taken through research and other programmatic activities in order to understand what can be done. So I will want to conclude here with this slide. This is the last slide I have, which is defining what we could are potential priority areas for research in response to climate change and its impact on tropical disease. Number one would be the development of climate-resilient healthcare systems. Because to begin with, the issue is how can we strengthen the healthcare systems to respond to these shifts and changes in the disease transmission dynamics. Secondly, would be implementation of effective vector control strategies. We need to know what is the geographical or spatial distribution of a lot of these insects that are responsible for transmission of disease. As has already been seen, where there's evidence of spread of a lot of these vectors into new areas. And so this is an area that will require a lot more increased attention, a lot more surveillance activities to be able to know the extent of the challenge and the extent of the risk. Thirdly, would be what is called the upscaling of a One Health research approach. And now One Health involves looking at disease transmission holistically in terms of the disease in animals or in potential reservoir hosts, looking at the same disease within human populations, as well as looking at the same disease within the environment. As we said, many of these diseases have an environmental component, such as in the case of a lot of helminths, there is the contaminated soil contributes to disease transmission. So being able to have a very systems-based approach towards looking at disease transmission, I think would be also another area that could be explored. Finally, would obviously be the strengthening of the public health services and public health interventions in light of the growing challenges. So I think my last comment was this, that I think a lot of what would need to be done in terms of responding to climate health challenge and health would be focusing on understanding and contributing towards mitigation, as well as understanding and contributing towards adaptation. And inevitably, given that climate change is affecting, as I said, the entire ecosystem, the approach then needs to be very multidisciplinary. There's no way you can say that we in health are going to be able to effectively respond to issues of climate change in isolation. I think the approach has to be multidisciplinary and also a very scaled up approach. So I think that's where I'm going to for your attention.
Amos Bugwa, for that interesting presentation on the effect of climate change on health. I think at the end of the day, we can do everything else, but when our health is affected, then that's not what we want to go. So it's always good to also check that component, sometimes which will be from our area, particularly where we come from. We may forget the impact of that on health, and that's very good for that presentation. I think it's quite an so thank you to have questions and answer session, and we can be able to answer them to Professor Grace Njoroge. I believe Professor Grace, you are around.
Yes, I am, Dr. Jose. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I wish to thank our very able presenters who have taken us through a very engaged morning. And as I invite the questions, I think the director asked me to make some general comments that I want to probably do now and then invite the questions. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, in way of introduction, I think I'm not new to the university. I could be among the much older population of academic staff, but I've been away, came back just the other day. But I've been engaged in the area of climate change at various levels in terms of research, in terms of policy. While I was in my former employer, immediate former employer, I was very excited to be involved in a UN program called UN Learning, where one of the main objectives is to see how to bring matters of climate change into our curriculum at all levels. I am aware that that program has now started off, especially in the lower levels, and I believe as universities we will have a chance even to connect there. I also got involved in discussions towards the Climate Summit Africa, but this was more at the policy level. So it's a subject really I've been thinking about, and as I invite us to question time, allow me to add a few perspectives. And the first perspective is to remember that this is a major part of adding, and that's why it featured strongly in the Africa Summit that the country hosted. But more importantly, that as we come to the year 2024, the enhanced transparency framework will take effect. And therefore, as COP28 is being prepared, and consequently the outcomes, the matter of more transparent reports from countries on actions that have been taken as well as progress made towards climate change mitigation and adaptation is going to be a key focus. And therefore, as we think of research, we need therefore to think of research that is applied, but also action-oriented. And when we talk of action-oriented, we want to see that indeed we are bringing out what climate risks and vulnerabilities as a country we are having. And I'm very happy, as I thank our presenters this morning, that has come out very, very strongly. But number two, are we able to use the results of our research to guide policymakers, our planners, our politicians, as well as investments in climate financing, where even local communities are engaged? What will be our level of engagement in a multidisciplinary perspective, which includes communities, especially in the matter of climate financing? And of course, are we able to contribute to fast-tracking just mitigation, but also adaptation? So the key point here from a policy perspective is that we need, as researchers, to bring that aspect of incremental and transformative adaptation, because we are not going backwards. I liked some of the results that we saw this morning, that this matter of whether it is rising temperatures and other adverse effects, it's progressive. It's been increasing. I think it was Professor Gadenya's analysis of data from the 50s and 60s, and we are seeing that we really need actions that will bring a transformative adaptation from whichever discipline. And I looked at some of the opportunities that we have that would guide our direction in research. And one is the IPCC reports. I think the latest one is the 2022. And this intergovernmental panel on climate change has brought out key issues. I looked more on biodiversity and ecosystems, and it is very clear that the alterations are obvious in marine, in terrestrial, freshwater, whichever area. The climate-sensitive species and ecosystems are especially highly affected, and so we need serious responses. There are declines in ecosystem services, and as Professor Esonga said, my major concern is the pollinator declines. I may not have time to talk about it now, but it is obvious that part of the data that is there shows that pollinators, which are very, very important in part of what we are calling smart landscapes, are really declining, and there is something we can do about it. There are obvious mass mortalities that were reported in that report, even climate-related extinctions, and this is a serious issue that we as researchers need to begin to see how to contribute in bringing solutions. I think the other, has it stopped sharing? Can you hear me? Okay, it's moving now. The other area is the shifting of species geographical ranges. And I was very impressed by Dr. Bogwa's presentation on how some of those vectors are likely to change, to have seasonal changes, geographical changes, and therefore faced even with health challenges that we didn't have before, but still climate related. I think the other big one that I noted in that report is the conversion of some areas that used to be carbon sinks have now become carbon sources. There were forests, they are not there anymore. What can we do about it? And I think Narok is a good example, and there could be other areas where we want to see whether there are such kind of degradation. The blue carbon systems are the coastal areas. There are great changes there that we need to start thinking about, especially when it comes to irreversible consequences that we need to think about. I looked at what the impacts have been from that report, especially for Africa. If you look at the changes in ecosystem structure at the terrestrial level, it is a very high level of impact, because these black dots, the fresh water the same, the ocean the same, species shift changes. You can see at the terrestrial level, but more importantly in fresh water, the data is not even there to tell us what is happening around there. The ocean also, the impacts are very high, but when you come to phenological changes, I think these are minimal, except at terrestrial level, where there is so much need for data that can inform even in the next reporting. I think I've talked about species extinction. Professor Wesonga talked about risk to food security, and I think this is a big one because of the risk for malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency that we need to think about because of livelihood security and production systems, which we have talked about this morning. I think Dr. Bogo has brought the issue of human mortality and morbidity, the issue of increased risk of water and energy, which I think I can leave there. But thinking of the National Adaptation Plan, which is running from 2015 to 2030, I just wanted to bring this to attention. We may be aware, some may not, that it is expected that as academia and research institution, that we will have different aspects of research on climate adaptation and resilience, including improving understanding of climate change attribution in Kenya, providing information. So it is already in our policy documents that we are active participants. Some of the areas that the adaptation plan has really brought out, and we need to really inform ourselves, is the area of unsustainable land use practices. Some of them we have had this morning. Others are yet to be investigated. The area of climate vulnerability and risk assessments, I think especially those risk assessments, we need to broaden the scope. Provision of access to climate resilient tree species, we talked about that, but we can do much, much more. Diseases, I think we did talk about that. Issues of water conservation. Professor Songa brought about this matter of climate smart agriculture in regard to new food habits. I think we can think very seriously around there, especially high yielding, drought tolerant crops and livestock. Traditional knowledge, I think I didn't hear that, and what that knowledge can contribute in our adaptation and mitigation attempts. Breeding for crops, I think that came out very well. There was, I think today we are not talking about mining, oil and gases and so on, but there's a way in which we can tag ourselves in because of the climate variability that has to do with these other sectors as well. I also looked at the Climate Summit report that was generated in Nairobi. That is an area we can look at deeply, but I realized that there is a serious commitment on acceleration at all efforts on reduction of carbon emissions, including accelerated approaches to global decarbonization. And I think whatever research direction we may want to take, we want to align ourselves with what the African Summit did commit themselves to do. Then on bullet 2, the fulfillment of these developed countries giving this money. I don't know whether it has arrived, the 1,000 billion per year. And basically this is on climate financing. And therefore we need to be part of this restructuring on climate financing architecture so that we provide solutions and be part of those who are providing solution. But more importantly, the swift operationalization of the loss and damage fund. I think this is more of a policy issue, but it's going to be something we want to see how it will be operationalized after the COP28, which is happening November and December this year. I also looked at what the government has provided, especially in the Kenya Vision 2030. And one of the things we need to be aware of is that the medium-term plan 4, which runs from 2023 to 2027, has already identified climate change as quite a challenge, especially in areas of drought, flooding, changing weather patterns, lake levels, and so on. And I think most of the activities have been key priority activities have been put in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. I'm sure energy will have something, but this is a critical area on restoration campaigns. I think we have a lot to offer, and rehabilitation of water towers. We have a lot that we can offer. There is already a budget, an annual budget for accomplishment of some of these priority areas, which we can connect with. And I think today we have real gaps that Professor Gathenya brought about, Professor Wesonga, and also Dr. Bogo. I don't want to go into that, but they are very, very critical issues that they raised. On Professor Gathenya's presentation, I think he raised issues of soil as a water reservoir, but also as a carbon sink, which is really a new matter that we could think seriously about. The biogas in wherever instead of charcoal is a big one. And as Professor Wesonga brought out the issue of the technologies, I think there is a call to really come up. We are a university of technology. He brought out some of the technologies they are bringing about on adaptation and mitigation on climate change, on capillary, and a few other things like new and improved seeds. I think he said there's a challenge there. But we can think widely around the area of technologies that can help us in management towards better climate response. Dr. Bogo, I think you have brought issues on disease prevalence, increased risks because of climate change, the vectors and cross-border transmissions, and there are very many questions that have come. I hope you are able to, each one of you as presenters, to see what is on the chart in regard to that which you have presented. Maybe I can just, for the audience who are in the room, you could be bring out yours, but there are a few in the chat that I want to bring out. Professor Wesonga, thank you very much. You have already addressed the matter of clogging. Please, members, you can check the charts. you have brought out the issue of shading as a mechanism for temperature control, the use of recycled water, yes, for micro kitchen gardens, renewable energy, yes, as a change in temperature and so on. But Dr. Mbogwa, there are issues there about the vectors. Is it possible to comment about the increase in vectors that affect animals? I think you talked about human health, and then vector maps for insects or vectors like mosquitoes, black flies. Are they there, or is this an area that we can generate? There's a question which Professor Gathenya, probably you could address on mitigation measures for degraded soils. And this could be also yours on what is the average Kenyan footprint, carbon footprint. Maybe you can start with you, Professor Wasonga, in summary of some of the responses you made. Then we come to Dr. Mbogwa and Professor Gathenya, and then we take questions from the audience in the room. The room, I mean, at JKUAT.
Hello, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, so basically we are looking at what's in the chat. Some of the responses, I've tried to provide the responses to them. And yeah, there was the issue of the subsurface drip irrigation. So the kind of drip lines that are used are not the ones that are used on the surface. But we are also trying to look at how we can maybe adopt the ones that we have to use. Because usually the ones that are used subsurface are more expensive. But if you consider the duration they take, I think it's a worth investment because they last a bit longer, they are more durable. So, and they're adapted so they don't clog. So I think they are not the same ones that we are using for the surface. Then the other question that I saw was to do with, was there another question on the chart?
The issue of recycled water.
Yes, recycled water. It is part of the innovation I think that we want to look at, especially the gray water. So there are some simple technologies that people have proposed. For example, mixing overnight with some type of ash. But we need also to validate that because I think this is being done by people, I mean the practitioners, but we need to maybe as scientists to assess whether that can work. But definitely there is scope for us to utilize gray water. It's only the brackish water that perhaps would be a challenge, but the gray water we can recycle and use as part of climate smartness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Mbogwa, on the matter of vector maps, the increase, are there increases in vectors affecting animal health?
Yes,
Please, you could switch off one gadget. I think you have to.
Both? Okay, I believe I'm audible. So with regard to vector maps, I've written something on the chat. I think there are some organizations that provide some of these maps. ECP, I know, is doing some work on Vector Atlas. And there's another organization called ESPEN, which deals with maps to do with the distribution of various entities. Although, as I indicated there, they may not be specific to the insect vectors, but they would probably be useful. But again, I think my general comment, even as I respond to these different comments, is that the idea here today was to trigger thinking and to elicit questions. So no, I won't venture to suggest that I have all the answers to the question. I think if we had all the answers, then I think there would be no point in having this seminar. I think it's really to highlight areas of that need addressing. There's a question as to is there increase in vectors carrying diseases affecting animals? Again, my area is not mainly in veterinary parasitology, but I know when we're talking about these veterinary vectors, we're talking about ticks, tick-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, and even some flies like sesaflies. So I think my general point is I don't have any current data on the distribution of these vectors, but I think there are organizations who working in this, among them ILRI, which we could look for and see whether they have any data relating to that. KETRI, I know, has been doing work on trypanosomiasis for very many years. So I think I think we're just saying there's need for increased surveillance so as that we can have up-to-date data. I think that's really the statement that we're making, and especially to explore areas which have traditionally not been thought to be endemic, because so as to verify whether there is any risk of spread of these insects into new areas. I think that's what I would say on that. Let me see. I think there was a comment from Dr. Gachanja about would drug residue measurements in different matters be useful. Again, I'm not sure that is relating to what I was talking about, but again, I think my general statement is there's a really opportunity to investigate different aspects to see how disease transmission is being affected, both looking at the pathogens, but also different vectors. And there could actually be even emergence of new vectors, for existing diseases, even as diseases emerge in new areas. The question about whether the black fly, I think is synonymous with the black soldier fly, the answer is no. The black fly is of the Simulium species. There are various ones, and it's found in different areas of Africa, but it's not the black soldier fly. No, I don't have experience, this Dr. Wesonga, on urban heat island phenomenon. I know that refers to areas or pockets in urban areas where you have increased temperature and whether that leads to increased incidence of disease. So I think there are organizations like APHRC do a lot of work in urban areas and disease transmission. So I would have to look and see whether they've done studies. But again, if there's not, again, that opens a new area for investigation as to whether we have changes in disease transmission in such areas in the urban setting. Comment from Elijah Gumba that you observed that regions in the past that did not have mosquitoes are now quite burdened. And I think that is exactly what we're saying. I think people even seem to suggest, almost wondering whether malaria is now becoming likely transmissible or endemic in other areas like Nairobi. So far, we don't have such evidence. But the point is, yes, we are having an increase in areas where you're seeing much more cases of vectors like mosquitoes. So if these vectors are able to thrive and breed in new areas, then definitely they would carry with them, with their presence there, the diseases that they transmit. And then there's also a comment from Dr. Gathenya about areas under pastoral and agro-pastoral systems that are dependent on water harvested from the surfaces. Yes, I think I totally agree with you in areas such as where there could be links to waterborne diseases. So again, as we have shifts and in such shifts in terms of the presence of water, areas where flooding is becoming much more common, then definitely the risk, again, we say the risk is increased for the transmission of such disease. And again, that opens up areas for disease surveillance and to be able to see, are these concerns legitimate, or do we have we verified that there's no evidence to support that there's actually transmission of such disease in these areas? So I think the key thing is we need to generate a lot of current up-to-date evidence so that we can be able to go beyond just concerns to actually having evidence to support what the current picture looks like. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mbugua. Very clear. I can see Dr. Kigira is mentioning something on us being a University of Technology, Canada Tech research on use of artificial intelligence, remote sensing, etc., on climate smart agriculture. I think is a very relevant subject but I would like, as we bring in Professor Gathenya to make a comment, but personally, I think it is. There's a question there about funding, and I think the government has some money. I already heard and know that the National Research Fund that Professor Gathenya is working under, and other collaboration with the ministries that are assigned to the various aspects of climate change. And now I think even the counties have a budget on climate change. They have committees that are working on climate change at county levels. And maybe the development partners, I did mention the UN Learning on climate change. There could be many others. We just need to explore, even as we come together, forming research teams. I'm sure the money is there because the work needs to be done. And as COP28 gets done towards end December, we need to find out that commitment that developing countries are supposed to provide for, of course, managing carbon issues, whether there is a component that can come to research. Professor Gathenya, I hope you are in the meeting.
Just a few comments. Somebody asked the question about
yes,
the carbon footprint of an average Kenyan. It is 0.34 tons compared to an American who has a footprint of 16 tons. So we are 50 times less. What that means is any mitigation efforts that we do as Kenyans is not likely to have a big impact globally. But that doesn't mean we should not do mitigation. I feel that we should do mitigation because mitigation has global benefits as well as local benefits. When you capture carbon, when you plant trees, over and above the global impact the trees may have, there is a benefit for you as a community. I talked about the need for energy for Maasai households. This is a real issue. I mean, as we talk, the homes are smoking, and growing trees may sequester carbon, but it also has immediate local benefits, including materials for construction and so on. So we should do it not because of the global impact, but because of the local impact. Soils that have high organic carbon content will erode less. They will infiltrate more water. They will recharge our groundwater, and they will produce cleaner water in our rivers. They will purify our systems, our river systems, and reduce the flooding that we have in our cities. So that is the benefit, not just the global benefit. The other question was about what options are there to reclaim these degraded lands or degraded soils. I think we do have technologies, and people in agriculture and in botany, we know the technologies that are available to put more carbon in the soils and to also rehabilitate these degraded lands, including soil and water conservation. But the question we need to ask ourselves and how we need to engage with counties is where they are putting their money. I put in my presentation, although I didn't have time to read. In Narok, we have over 800 water pans. Each water pan stores have 500,000 liters of water. I gave you an estimate that you could store much more water in the soils, but over and above that, each water pan costs upwards of 5 million. So these 800 water pans probably cost 4 billion. If I give you 4 billion, the question is whether you put more water pans and boreholes, which is what the counties are doing. You give them money, they put more water pans and boreholes. And nobody thinks about soil and water conservation. giving more money to extension services, because we don't have, our extension services is basically very weak, and farmers have a problem getting support by people who know how to implement soil and water conservation practices. So how do we reverse this diversion of resources more towards immediate short-term investments versus long-term investments in our natural resources, in our soils and in our land? So that's a big thing, how to engage with policymakers, to put the money more in the natural resources, especially in the soil, so that we have a reversal of this land degradation. The other aspect that I think we missed out, we didn't have people, of course, in livestock presenting about the climate change impact on livestock. I think that's a big, maybe they can present next time. But the other thing that is also there is planning, urban and rural planning, especially creating climate resilient urban centers. We have all these counties coming up with new urban centers coming up everywhere, but we need a new way of designing this upcoming urban centers so that they are more climate resilient. And I mentioned also the idea of designing roads, rural roads, that don't become gullies. Most of our engineers spend a lot of time designing things in the cities like Nairobi, talking about tarmacked roads. But in the interior of our counties, we have these earth roads that are actually turning out to be gullies, and they generate a lot of soil, which goes all the way, in the case of Narok, all the way to Tanzania, to Lake Natron. So I think we need to also put our efforts towards urban and physical planning, seeing where the gaps are and how cities can be planned in the future to reduce the impact of floods in our buildings, in our roads, and also in our farms. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. We continue to receive more responses online, but I don't know whether there is, before I bring out what is on the chat, could we have some responses from the ground? Ground meaning the conference room. You can either put your hand, I'm sure director and the team are there, or you just unmute, and then before I bring the other conversations that are online, I would like our presenters to go through them and prepare a response.
Yes, there's a question here.
Any comment? Yes.
There's a question. Somebody wants to make a question. Maybe you can come here.
Yeah, I can see a gentleman walking towards
yes.
someone. Welcome, and tell us your name. Are you a student? Are you a staff member?
Good morning.
There you go.
My name is, yes.
Who?
My name is Patrick.
Patrick,
Mongi.
Welcome. Yes.
I'm a master's student from the Department of Chemistry.
Thank you.
And I have maybe some few recommendations or maybe inquiries to make. And or maybe yes, let me put them as recommendations and or maybe inquiries.
Just
I wanted to okay, so I wanted to maybe ask now that maybe we usually produce the GMO foods, the genetically modified food. So my concern was, is there a possibility, especially those in agriculture or maybe botany or those areas, is there a way we can come up with seedlings, tree seedlings that are modified to adapt or maybe to take care or maybe to adapt in the different climatic conditions, such that maybe you can produce a seedling that is able to adapt in a given region where maybe there hasn't been a lot of rain or something like that. or maybe a seedling that can come up to a tree, which can be enhanced to modify or to advance its carbon sinking capability such that it can absorb more of carbon from the environment. Or maybe we can also come up with a seedlings or maybe modify seedlings that that has lower water intake and maybe even at the point of releasing water into the environment, maybe it minimizes whatever is being expelled into the environment. And from this, I see it as a benefit in that if we can be able to develop such seedlings or such trees, we can be able to handle the aspect of the carbon sinks, because now we'll have more carbon sinks or more capable carbon sinks as trees. And it can also improve the tree coverage, and also maybe the trees that we are trying to come up with, they can have even a faster maturity rate, such that remember at the moment the government is seeking to, there was a rule or a law that was passed that people are now allowed to harvest trees that have matured. So maybe it can be an aspect that we have trees that mature faster, and therefore it will take care of the need in the society. And then this maybe is a recommendation to the agriculture, maybe in the university, to the Department of Agriculture. Maybe as they generate, I saw some presentation that they're trying to generate tree seedlings and maybe give to the government, or maybe they are purchased by the government in order to be planted. So maybe they can enhance this such that as they produce the seedlings, they can come up with those seedlings that have been modified, so that we don't just plant any trees. We can be objective and we can sort the issue of climate change. Maybe second last is the aspect of biogas.
You can
summarize the aspect of biogas. Sorry.
Summarize your.
Yes. On the aspect of biogas, maybe might come up with a pardon? Yes, on the biogas, we can try commercialize the aspect, try do away with the LPG gases. Maybe we can put them in cylinders just the way LPG is. And the final one, recommend those stakeholders to also support those who would wish to venture in environmental courses, like myself, I'd wish to participate in that. So if you can support more researchers that are more energetic, that they're zealous, and maybe they're trying to come up in the area, I believe we'll be able to increase the force and the manpower to push this aspect of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you. Let's have one more from the conference room. Anybody else? Dr. Kuya, is there a hand raised? I can't see.
Currently, there's none.
Okay, then I will invite our presenters to respond to that MSc student from chemistry, the issue of modified plants, modified maybe for arid land. What are the breeding programs or breeding potential? Fast growing seedlings, the issue of biogas. I think Professor Gathenya already talked about biogas and what level of stakeholder involvement. That's a student who would want to participate. Let's start with Professor Wesonga as you answer the one from Dr. Kagira on the use of climate atlas. What's the scope and current status?
Yes, thank you very much. I saw Dr. Kagira's question on the atlas. There are a few others, maybe I will just also run through them.
You could also check the one by Evelyn. There's a long comment there.
Yes, she gave a comment on dragon fruit. Yeah, so
yes.
My responses, let me start with Dr. Kagira. So the climate atlas is basically what is happening is that we have global projections that are being done by IPCC. But our interest was at least to look at what is happening locally. Is the effect the same at all places? And therefore, what we wanted is to get what we can consider to be the expected changes under Kenyan situation. So our atlas is localized, so we try to more or less customize the various models that are being used by IPCC to get what scenario we can expect at local level. And we worked with the 2 counties, Kiambu and Kajiado. So at the moment, we have optimized it for Kiambu and Kajiado. The intention was that we can progressively develop it for other counties as well. We have some funding from EU. We shall be looking at Narok, and also we are also going to look at we are expanding it to Ghana and Zimbabwe. So the funding we have for AU is supposed to cover Kenya, and for Kenya, we picked Narok and Nairobi. Those are the 2 counties that we are going to focus on. So in terms of scope, we have Kiambu and Kajiado, but we are likely going to also now do Narok and Nairobi. Now, but the atlas also has a component which we call an expert tool. So if you go to the expert tool, you can be able to look at whatever processes. So if you have a threshold for a process, so maybe, for example, you have maybe photosynthesis can only occur at a temperature threshold of, say, 30 degrees. You can actually use the tool to try and see which areas will exceed the temperature of 30 or 40 or whatever temperature threshold that you have. And then from there, you can try to see what are the implications of the climate change on that specific process. So we have the atlas that generally gives an indication of what to expect. And then using your expert knowledge, you can try to deduce what you can expect. Then the question on renewable energy, we have a project we shall be doing on the ASAL, and the renewable energy we are thinking about mainly solar energy, and we are trying to combine solar energy with the water harvesting, because from what we have seen is that we shall be getting a lot of rain occasionally, and then that water, of course, runs to waste. So we think if we can be able to harvest that water and combine it with renewable energy such as solar, then we can be able to do some good farming. But again, we would be happy with Professor Gadenya's, I think, intervention, how we can store that water in soil, and so that we can use it. I think Professor Gachanja has something on how fertilizer can be used. I had mentioned we have technologies like slow release fertilizers, also applying fertilizer based on soil testing, so that we are not just dumping fertilizer, but applying it according to whether they are required or not. Because sometimes we have enough residual fertilizer, but we are still putting in more fertilizer. And maybe the problem is, in fact, pH, which just needs to be corrected. And then we also have timing of fertilizer application. Those can be important things. For shading of using trees, I saw Dr. Kuya asked, there are trees that we think would be more suitable. So in agroforestry system, usually the guideline we have is whether is mainly the canopy structure. Normally we would recommend trees that have a vertical orientation, because they can reduce the radiation coming in, and therefore have some cooling effect without overshading. If you have horizontal leaf orientation, so that normally would provide too much shading, and that can affect the yield. And the question on ugali, whether improved ugali is not as tasty as the other ugali, I really don't know, because normally I think there are people who are very, very, very particular about ugali. I hear there are people who can tell the difference between soko ugali and whether it is another brand of ugali. So I don't know, but I think it's a question of us changing our eating habit, like I said. If the improved maize varieties are more suitable, then we need to work on our eating habits. I usually give an example of watermelon. You know, Kenyans used not to eat watermelons. But with the time, everybody is eating watermelon. So it's a question of people getting to learn that this is what is available and this is what makes sense under our changing circumstances. So we embrace the change and then we can move on. I think that's what I can respond to quickly under the given time limit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. And I'm being guided that there was supposed to be a tea break. Dr. Kuya, how would you like us to end here or?
No, I think what the plan was we finish and then the tea break, because we know we also have people who are online.
Yes.
So we continue with everything, and then after that, because there's another presentation that comes from the Directorate of Grant Management immediately after this. We want to have it, and then after that we conclude with the way forward.
I can invite our presenters to make their very last in view of the comments on the chat, and then we stop here, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope they can do it in the very short, less than 5 minutes.
Maybe less than a minute. Professor Wesonga has done. It's just Dr. Mbugua. If you have something more to say. And
Dr.
then
Mbugua has excused himself.
Sorry?
He has a meeting.
Okay. Professor Gadenya, your last.
My last comment.
Yes.
So my dream is net zero carbon and net runoff. Landscapes that produce no runoff and no emissions. Net emissions, net runoff. Perhaps that is possible, that every drop that falls gets into the soil and does not run off. And also landscapes that don't add to emissions and don't lead to land degradation in the long term. That's my dream, and I welcome you to think along with me and with others towards achieving that, reducing the water footprint and the carbon footprint. Somebody talked about carbon footprint, but there is also the water footprint. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Please join me in giving a hand of applause to our very, very able presenter.
Prof, you're muted.
Am I? No, I'm not. You can't hear me?
Prof.
I can hear her.
It's us. Okay.
Yes, I just wanted us to give a reaction. Those of us online, let's give a clap, a hand of applause to our very able presenters and participants. Thank you so much. This was really, really very scientific, very objective, and has stimulated us from wherever we are coming from to do something about climate smart landscapes. Thank you so much. Over and back to you, Dr. Hosea.
Thank you very much, Professor Grace Njoroge, for leading us in that session, and very well, and also for the presenters and those who asked questions. So right now, because of time, we want to move directly to the last presentation. And as I said, we are having a presentation from the Directorate of Grant Management. We have John Shohi, who is representing the Director of Grant Management, and she'll be making a presentation, which will be brief, and then from that will be almost coming to an end. Maybe there'll be just one more step, and then we conclude. So, Mr. John Gashori, I don't know whether you are ready.
Yes, I am.
All right.
So let me pick it. So Good afternoon, everyone. For those who are in the room and those who have joined online. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who are in the room and those who have joined online. For those who are in the room and those who have joined online.
One of the gadgets. You have several gadgets.
Okay, sorry for that. So for those who are in the room and also those who are online, welcome to this presentation from the Directorate of Grants Management. My name is Dr. John Bashohi. I'm a board member of the Directorate, representing the College of Health Sciences, COHES. But I'm here today to present the Director, Professor Naomi Maina, who was unable to make it to this meeting today. So I'll be very brief, and I will basically also touch on things, climate change.
Please use the presentation mode.
Okay. Is that better?
It's okay, that's good.
Great. So at the Directorate of Grants Management, we have 5 objectives. The first one being to enhance the capacity of JKUAT staff and students in acquisition of grants. The second one being improving JKUAT responsiveness to calls for proposals and consultancies. The third one being to improve the efficiency in the administrative, procurement, and financial management procedures in line with the Government of Kenya guidelines, existing university policies, and donor requirements. The fourth one is to strengthen accountability in management of grants and enhance compliance with statutory and contractual requirements. And lastly, to strengthen partnership between JKUAT and its stakeholders for sustainable development. So the services that we provide is basically to provide information to JKUAT staff and students, particularly the postgraduate students, on upcoming calls for grant proposals and bids. Train JKUAT staff and students as well on successful proposal writing. Number 3, processing of institution letters of support and endorsement for calls and consultancies when the researchers respond to the calls. And number 4, processing of contract agreements on grants and consultancies. The 5th one is acting as a liaison as a university with all our Ds and assisting in solving challenges that may arise during the grant life cycle. And lastly, enhancing the visibility of JKUAT in respect to grants and management. So we have a grants management life cycle. It's something that is has got a continuous iteration. We start with the strategy development that goes on to negotiation and contracting within the Directorate. Then project award and implementation, that one now comes to the issue with the
We can't hear you.
that have been received, the funds that have been received in the same quarter is also in excess of 105 million Kenya shillings. So we have current calls on climate change, quite a number of them, and I will go through them very, very fast. The first one is on Horizon CL6 2024 Climate 01, improving irrigation practices and technologies in agriculture. And we are able to see these calls in the website, the grants management website. It's amounting to 10 million euros with a deadline of 22nd February next year. The next one is this from the same funder, but this is on socioeconomic, climate, and environmental aspects of paludiculture. Again, with the same deadline date. The same funder, paludiculture large-scale demonstrations, 20 million euros with the same deadline. And the next one is the same funder, yes, land use and deadline of 22nd February. This one is a to climate change and to help achieve climate neutrality and climate neutrality of all sectors by 2050. From the same funder in the construction sector to support the new European boreholes, 14 million euros. Deadline is 22nd February 2024. This is something that this topic will support the new European boreholes initiative and the implementation of the new EU forest strategy by making the construction sector more renewable. Next is ocean models for seasonal to decadal regional climate impacts and feedbacks. Amount is 9 million euros. This, I think, they are more targeted to the European researchers, the same deadline. This one is case studies to advance research on climate change adaptation strategies and their impact on public health by Fogarty International Center. The amount is $15,000 US. The deadline is closed 13th November. And this is part of the in collaboration with partner NIH institutes and centers, a center within the US National Institutes of Health. They are inviting submissions for a collection of case studies on adaptation strategies that respond to the impact of climate change on public health. So that is all we have. Visit our website for these calls and links so that one can see whether he is able to respond to the calls. So thank you so much. That is all from the Directorate of Grants Management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. Let's clap for him. Yeah, thank you for that presentation and also giving us, I think what we have been looking is where we can be able to get the funds, and for sure you can see there are calls which are still there, which are still open, and maybe those are some of the areas we may have to think on the way forward and how we can be able even maybe to form teams. And therefore, at this moment, I think we're almost coming to a close. I would want to invite the director the director of research at JKUAT, Dr. Shem Kuya, who will give his closing remark and the way forward, because after you have done all these, then what else? So Dr. Shem, welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. Foremost appreciation for Dr. Gishuhi for the opportunities you have highlighted. I think we've had a lot, but before that, allow me to appreciate the presenters, Professor Gadenya, Professor Esonga, Dr. Mbugua, who have really shown that we can cross boundaries and be able to work in multiple disciplinary aspects, then the opportunities that you've been shown. The number of things that have picked from this seminar. One is our strengths. Looking at the presentation that we've had, it answers some of the questions regarding what is your strength in JKUAT. And this is only part of what we have. There are a lot of other disciplines out there that have not been handled. And so what you're saying is that this is a discussion that we've started. We're very sure climate change is not going away. It will be here with us. And so there is a need for us to take action, but then we have to start from somewhere. The other thing that I've noted from here is the need for partnership and the need to take action, especially looking at the cross-pollination of ideas and then the interrelatedness of climate change effect and causes in various aspects of our lives. And then also what Professor Njoroge has brought about, taking the opportunities at place, especially the national and the global action plans. And so having those evidence provided to us, some of the questions that I have in mind is, do we have a climate action strategy at JKUAT, something that can help us? That is something that maybe we may want to start discussing around. How do we participate in the current national climate actions? This one will require that we have leads. So the question that the challenge that I'm sending to us online and here and to the university, who are willing to come and take lead so that we concretize this discussion, form research clusters. And then the other aspect is what will be the immediate low-hanging fruits that we could explore. My thinking is we will need to have follow-up discussions. I think this webinar cannot sum it all. We'll need to have a follow-up discussion that can help us identify areas that have been suggested where we can come into groups, mobilize others who are not here, and see how we can write a proposal for funding, but also see just how to get this into focused research areas that define us and that position JKUAT as a premier institution in research to help solve some of the problems that are affecting our country, but also contribute to development. So those are my remarks. I really appreciate everybody who made it. I appreciate the organizing committee for this work. Hosea, Were, Elijah, and the research department team. I really appreciate the social media group. Dorothy and the team, we really appreciate. So thank you so much. We come to an end of this webinar, and God bless you.
Thanks and bye-bye.
Okay. And there is tea. I forgot to mention, there is plenty of tea outside. For those participating online, you may want to take some water in your place or tea. But for us, we have plenty of tea. Those participating online within JKUAT, just walk over and take some tea with us. Karibuni sana. Asante.